Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch, and welcome today to the review of another watch you didn't know you needed, but you do. I mean, like, you really need this watch. Or at least that's what the brand hopes to convince you of. 2 years ago I reviewed this, the HVD Spectre Diver, from what was at the time a new Singapore-based micro brand that had a set of specs I'd never seen before. It was a vintage style dive watch, but with modern sizing, acrylic crystal and a manual wind Solita movement. HVD, by the way, stands for hand wound vintage design. So a manual wind vintage style modern sized dive watch. Anyway, their campaign was a success and they're back now with a second model. I know what you're thinking though. Can it be true? Have they produced a vintage style dive watch with modern sizing, acrylic crystal and a manual wind chronograph movement? If today is your last day on earth, you can die happy because yes, they have. Introducing the HVD Spectre Diver Chronograph, the watch you never knew you needed, but you can't live without. Maybe. Now, you saw the pop-up. This video is sponsored by HVD. This one has been live on Kickstarter for a few days now. I'll leave a link to that campaign in the description of the video. Look, this isn't the only watch with that set of specifications on the market, but there aren't all that many of them, to be honest. Trust me, I've looked. There are niches within niches, and then there's this one. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. Okay, let's get into it. Perhaps you guessed from my tone in the intro, I'm not 100% convinced by this particular watch. I'm just not sure what it's for, and I'm not quite sure the brand has got it entirely right, what even they claim it to be. Now, that's not to say it's a bad watch or that I hate it, because it's not and I don't, and I think it's fairly well priced compared to its competitors, or should that be competitor? I've only found one watch, as I said, with a similar set of specs. I just think they've made one potentially fatal error with this one. I featured the watch on the channel before. I took it to Tasmania in my What's in the Watch Roll video a few weeks ago, and I talked about that error in that video. The Kickstarter campaign hasn't got over the line yet, and I think this might be the reason why it hasn't got over the line. Anyway, I'll talk about that a bit later on. Now, I can't show you the packaging because they didn't send me any packaging, but here's a screenshot of my review of the three-hander a couple of years ago. I think there's a fair bet you're going to get a pouch just like this one if you do back the campaign. Now, in terms of dimensions, this one is deceptively chunky. It feels a bit meatier than the on-paper, or in this case, the on-screen dimensions would suggest. It's also a bit larger than the brand suggests it is. I measure it at 40mm in diameter and not the 39 they claim. Thickness of 15.3mm and not the 14.5mm that they claim. Now, we are both in agreement at 47mm lug to lug, 20mm between the lugs with a taper down to 16 and back up to 18 for the clasp. Sized up for my average size wrist, it comes in at 142 grams, so it doesn't quite have the on-wrist levity of many retro pieces. Water resistance is 50 meters, push-pull crown because it's a manual winder, domed acrylic crystal because it's a retro piece, and a SEA-GULL ST19 in the back because it's a chronograph, which is a living legend of a movement. This is an 80-plus-year-old Swiss design. The Chinese bought it in the 1960s and have since then made it their own, and it's having a real moment at the moment. It's appearing in the back of watches from $115 to over $600, and it's a column wheel chronograph. You can see me starting and stopping and resetting it here. It's fascinating to look at. There's lots going on, 22 joules and a variable power reserve. Now, I usually quote high 30s with low to mid 30s if you're going to leave the chrono running. The chrono will just keep running, by the way. It does not stop after 30 minutes. It just ticks over and keeps going. When you go really close, it doesn't look quite as flash. You can begin to see a few rough edges here and there, but it is pretty amazing that we can buy a watch with a column wheel chronograph in it for well under $500. The case and bracelet are both real highlights, both carried over directly from the three-hander. There's a nice arc to the mid-case and an even nicer high-polish chamfer running from the tip to the tip. Drilled lugs as well. They assist with strap changes. I think they're offering a couple of straps as add-ons. Check the campaign. Female end links always get a shout out because they always make a watch wear nicer on smaller wrist. There's plenty of grip on the crown, and the ST19 always provides a satisfying snap when you depress its pushers. There's a high polish undercut to both sides of the case, but really it's just there for show. The case back sticks out so far that the sides are not really in contact with your wrist at any point ever. The bracelet is very attractive and nicely made. It's smooth to the touch, no sharp edges. Now, it's only a 3-link oyster style. That little outer high polish link is in fact a faux link. It's just been machined to look like a 5-link rather than a 3, but it does add a lot of character. And I do like the taper, 20 to 16, very much in keeping with the vintage thrust of the watch. Clasp is okay. HVD very nicely etched into its brushed upper surface. There's a pair of high polished chamfered edges running in line with those faux outer links. Double pushers, 3 holes of micro adjust, and a very smooth milled scissor. It lacks quick release end links and on the fly adjustment, but the drilled lugs at least make up for half of that. The bezel on this one is 60-click bi-directional, and they've chosen to use a 12-hour aluminium insert rather than a dive time bezel insert. This means that in theory you can track a second time zone using the indices on the dial to track the first and the numerals on the bezel to track the second. How many people will feel the need to do this is very much up for debate though. The chronograph, really simple in operation. 1 push of the top pusher to start, 1 push of the top pusher to stop, 1 push of the bottom pusher to reset. But if you don't stop it, like I said, it'll just keep on spinning. Dial and hands, very straightforward. It's an enamel dial with applied circular indices and 2 more complex wedge-shaped tapered batons at the 12 and the 6. There are no markers at the 3 and the 9. They make way for the 2 slightly recessed black sub-registers with white printed markings and lots of concentric circles when you get in a little bit closer. The branding is relatively minimal, just HVD above the pinion and Spectre Diver chronograph beneath it. Chronograph in blue, just picking out the blue tip of the chronograph hand, which seems appropriate. Now, pandas are cool, but I think they always benefit from just the merest touch of colour. The 2 main hands are also carried over from the old watch, high polish, bevel down the middle, and again tapered at both ends to complement the 2 main hour markers. If you don't like black and white, there's a black and gilt version with a touch of red, which looks really good. Again, make sure you check out the campaign for more details. The loom is also pretty good, considering that's not always the case with this retro style of watch. BGW9 and a fairly liberal application of it on the 2 main hands, all of the hour markers and the pip in the bezel triangle. At the end of the test, everything is still nice and legible. Good job on the loom. And it wears very pleasantly as well. Like I said, the bracelet is super comfy, but you do notice it's thick around the middle because the crystal sticks up and the case back sticks out. That's where those female end links really come into their own, ensuring an instant drop bang on the 47mm lug to lug length. There's definitely more weight in the head than the bracelet, but it doesn't feel particularly unbalanced. That's a little further away for some perspective. Yeah, it's definitely not a 39, it's definitely a 40. Maybe the case is 39, but the bezel was definitely a 40. That's how it looks, and that's how it feels, and that's how, therefore, it wears. And finally, the pocket shot to finish. It's been a while, but my bottom half still exists, as do my Tiger shorts. At 140 grams, this one is kind of on the border for me, on the border of low and loose or high and tight, if you see what I mean. In this case, I'm wearing it loose. It's a nice smooth crown, so there's no problem with it digging into the back of your hand. Alright, moans and niggles, well, if you watched my What's in the Watch roll, then you know what my big moan today is, but let's get my little moans out of the way first. Only 3 holes of micro adjust in the clasp. It probably needs a 4th because the links themselves are quite lengthy. There are obviously 2 different colour versions, the black and gold and the panda. The silver hands on the white dial of the panda do rather come and go, as you can see here from this footage. That is by no means unique to this watch though. Pretty much any and every white dial watch with silver hands has exactly the same issue. Perhaps gunmetal hands and indices would have kept that panda look, but brought just a little bit more legibility to the party. And the caseback crystal appears to jut out from the actual caseback. Perhaps it needed to, perhaps there just wasn't quite enough clearance for that tall ST19. Perhaps they should have adjusted the caseback to fit the crystal better though, because it is slightly odd that it doesn't sit flush. But my pet peeve with this one is that they're still calling it a diver. When was the last time you saw a watch with 50 meters of water resistance with the word diver printed on the dial? Perhaps it was indeed the 1950s. Now, this is clearly a retro style watch. There's a vague argument that they can get away with it as a consequence, but you know, that is doing them favors today, I think. I think they should have ditched that word and just called it the HVD Spectre chronograph. Surely that would have made more sense. Or they could have redesigned the watch in order to get at least 100 meters of water resistance and put a dive bezel on it. One of the two, surely. I mentioned there was another watch that I found with the same set of specs. Here it is. It's the Laurier Gemini. Same movement, same colorway, same 12-hour bezel even, same 50 meters of water resistance. But Laurier haven't labelled it a dive watch. They've called it a retro racing chronograph, a vintage sports timer. The specifications therefore make much more sense when you're not claiming that the watch can get wet, because really, how many of you will be comfortable taking a 50-meter rated chronograph into the water with you at all? Yeah, me neither. And while we're at it, the Kickstarter campaign and press kit are both a little bit on the hokey side for me, I'm afraid. There's a lot of unwavering passion and profound appreciation, as well as an exquisite exploration of meticulous craftsmanship. And that's just the designer's bio. And we all know the SEA-GULL ST19 is a unique proposition, an affordable mechanical column wheel chronograph, and it is not something that as a community of watch lovers we should take for granted. But they're mass-produced in China very, very cheaply. They have a far higher failure rate than a Seiko or a Miyota, so talking about its mechanical sophistication, its tactile finesse, and the artistry and engineering prowess behind it is probably stretching reality just a little bit. The one in this watch performed beautifully at certain times and did some very, very strange things at other times. Pretty much par for the course with these SEA-GULLs, they have a bit of a mind of their own sometimes. And while the price of $399 US is $100 US cheaper than the aforementioned Laurier Gemini, it's exactly the same as the aforementioned HVD Spectre Diver 3-hander, and that had a Sellita SW210 in the back. I think therefore the old watch offered considerably better value than this one does. The market is becoming increasingly saturated with new brands and new models from old brands, so I understand what HVD was trying to do here. They were trying to get a second watch out of the same design as the first watch and hopefully offer something a little different, something that the average microband collector doesn't already have in their collection. But perhaps there's a reason that the average microband collector doesn't already have one in their collection. So there you have it. Not a bad watch, but not one I feel makes a particularly strong case for itself, and I'm not sure it's actually what HVD claim it to be either. Perhaps if they had deleted the word diver off the dial and knocked $50 off the price, this review would have been quite different. But there it is. If you want a SEA-GULL ST19 in your watch, you're not short of other options, why not have a look at either of these two? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again in the next one.